The Harlem Hellfighters was a regiment of New York National Guardsmen in the First World War. They were set up to fail by their own government. They were humiliated, degraded, eventually given to the French Army as a throwaway, and they ended up coming home as one of the most decorated units in the entire U.S. Army.
The Harlem Hellfighters are one of the most important regiments in American history. In World War I, they helped to establish to the entire world the power of black soldiers in the military.
It was very difficult at that time for African Americans to get into the United States military because there was this perception that African Americans would not do well in battle. They had to overcome the prejudice of their own countrymen and yet also perform ably on the battlefield.
Like so many units of African American descent, when they go overseas, they're not sure what they're going to do. Are they going to fight as infantry? Or are they going to be stevedores and load ships? Or are they going to be labor units and cut wood?
And so they're committed to labor duty, they're unloading ships, building latrines, those type of support services. And as you can imagine, these men have been trained and they're willing to fight, they're ready to fight, and this is stressful for them.
They were finally given to the French Army, which in a way was an even greater insult because in the First World War, when the United States entered, General Pershing, the commanding officer, was very clear that American forces would not be fed piecemeal into the French and British Army because the French and British wanted reinforcements, and Pershing said absolutely not. When Americans join this war, they will fight as an American force under an American flag led by an American general. ... except for the black guys. You can have them.
Henry Johnson is perhaps one of the most remarkable black military heroes in U.S. history.
And he found himself in no man's land with Private Needham Roberts manning a listening post.
And Needham Roberts hears click, click, click. And he realizes somebody's cutting the wire. It's potentially a German raid.
And so Roberts is passing him grenades, and they line up these grenades, and the Germans actually do come across the lines. Roberts is hurt, and now Henry Johnson is left to defend their position and to stave off this attack. And then he makes the mistake of jamming a French cartridge into his American gun, and it no longer will work. And the Germans are on top of it.
He then used his rifle like a club, and then he ended up fighting with a knife against the Kaiser's best and turned them.
He's wounded in the fray. He's struck, for example, in the foot, and has a debilitating injury as a result. And he fights them off, he says, for what seemed like an hour.
The Germans ran shrieking into the night, all because of one man.
It's not until the next morning that people realize what a tremendous act this was. They discover 4 bodies of dead German soldiers. And they also realize from the equipment and other things that are left behind that as many as 30 may have been involved in this altercation.
As soon as he drove off those Germans, the French awarded him with the Croix de Guerre, a great honor. Unfortunately, it took about 75 years for the US government to give him the Legion of Merit. Had he been white, he would have walked out of that war with the Medal of Honor. What was so shocking to me when I began to research the story of the Hellfighters was that after they had performed so magnificently in combat, the United States government actually sent a memorandum to the French government, essentially implementing Jim Crow. Essentially saying, don't give them some notion that they are equals because we don't want them taking that notion back to the United States and demanding equality.
When he come back to the United States, he's not awarded the Purple Heart. There's no notation in his military record of his injury. And so he winds up not being able to work because of this injury. He doesn't get any kind of assistance from the Army or from the government as a result. And he ends up dying in 1929 penniless. So it again shows the paradox. Here's this great story of valor and of courage on the part of this soldier, and ultimately he comes back to a nation that doesn't honor that sacrifice.
We tend to think we all know American history so well, but the story of the Harlem Hellfighters should be one of the first stories told. It wasn't about killing other people, it was about being Americans and serving their country well. That was the inclination of the Harlem Hellfighters.
When you are African American in 1917, democracy is armor. Democracy is a weapon. And to fight for a war to make the world safe for democracy was something more than just some ethereal crusade for the Hellfighters. It had concrete results. They were fighting for the rights to be a citizen of the country that they were born in.
As we marched along up Fifth Avenue, everybody was astounded because we used a new mass formation, 16 abreast. And we'd never seen before in this country. It was a formation we learned in France from the French instructors. And it was quite a sight. As we got to Harlem, we opened up the ranks so that the family and friends could see their loved ones. And believe me, they took a good look. Everybody wanted to see Henry Johnson. Everybody wanted to shake his hand. Oh, terrific. Terrific. Oh, we marched up Fifth Avenue. We had parties. We had, oh, the feeling was terrific. Everybody was happy. Everybody was wonderful. After the parade at the Armory, and then over here in Harrison Avenue Army in Brooklyn, had a big dinner. Seems that all these girls from the different churches and so forth volunteered their services. And I met one little girl there who I married later. And I stayed with her for 52 years. That's the picture you saw upstairs. And she's gone. She died in 72. But I met her at that reception coming home from France.
No, God knows how many of them come back, because I didn't come back with the regiment. When I came back in casualty ship. And still I'm here to talk. Thank God for that.
When I came home from the war, I was elected to Congress. Now, I haven't got many blacks in my district, but because I served with black troops, I think all the black troops in the country thought I was their representative. And I got these thousands of letters wanting compensation and all that. Anti-lynching bill, I put that in. Then there came the Battle Monument Bill, which I had lots of difficulty of doing. And I owed it, of course, and there's an obligation. Those blacks who died, they're fighting for freedom and democracy, as we told them. And I said, these boys fought and died, just the same as the white boys did. Fighting to defend their country and fighting for democracy and justice, and they're entitled to this monument as much as anybody else. And so I got it through the House by just putting the pressure on. And we got it through the House, and I don't know what happened to it then.
It took 10 years for something to happen. In 1937, the monument was built in the Champagne district on the plains of Saint-Pie. An inscription reads, "Erected by the United States of America to commemorate the achievements of our soldiers and those of France who fought in this region in World War I."
Part of a story that is often not told is the story of blacks in World War I. And this is an amazing collection that was brought to us by the granddaughter of someone who fought in World War I, a man named Lawrence McVie. Now, what is really powerful about this is, on the one hand, looking at medals, and we'll talk about what they are. It's a sharpshooter's medal. It is a Purple Heart for being wounded. It is a medal that shows that you fought in France, but it's the last medal that I want to focus on. Lawrence McVie was part of a unit known as the 369th in New York, known as Harlem's Hellfighters. When they went over to fight in 1917, the U.S. government didn't know what to do with them and basically gave them to the French. And so they fought in French uniforms initially. But they did such a brilliant job that they were given the highest accommodation in France, the Croix de Guerre. And so to actually have his Croix de Guerre and the photo of him wearing it is really an amazing way to, again, personalize the story and to ensure that people understand this rich military tradition that has shaped not only the African American community, but the American community at large.
Today we present America's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor, to Private Henry Johnson and Sergeant William Shemin. I want to begin by welcoming and thanking everyone who made this day possible. Family, friends, admirers. Some of you have worked 4 years to honor these heroes, to give them the honor that they should have received a long time ago. We are grateful that you never gave up. We're appreciative of your efforts. As a young man, Henry Johnson joined millions of other African Americans on the great migration from the rural South to the industrial North, a people in search of a better life. He landed in Albany, where he mixed sodas at a pharmacy, worked in a coal yard, and as a porter at a train station. And when the United States entered World War I, Henry enlisted. He joined one of only a few units that he could, the all-black 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters. And soon he was headed overseas. At the time, our military was segregated. Most black soldiers served in labor battalions, not combat units. But General Pershing sent the 369th to fight with the French Army, which accepted them as their own. Quickly, the Hellfighters lived up to their name, and in the early hours of May 15th, 1918, Henry Johnson became a legend. His battalion was in northern France, tucked into a trench. Some slept, but he couldn't. Henry and another soldier, Needham Roberts, stood sentry along no man's land. In the pre-dawn, it was pitch black and silent, and then a click, the sound of wire cutters. A German raiding party, at least a dozen soldiers, maybe more, fired a hail of bullets. Henry fired back until his rifle was empty. Then he and Needham threw grenades. Both of them were hit. Needham lost consciousness. 2 enemy soldiers began to carry him away while another provided cover, firing at Henry. But Henry refused to let them take his brother in arms. He shoved another magazine into his rifle. It jammed. He turned the gun around and swung it at one of the enemy, knocking him down. Then he grabbed the only weapon he had left, his bolo knife, and went to rescue Needham. Henry took down one enemy soldier, then the other. The soldier he knocked down with his rifle recovered, and Henry was wounded again, but armed with just his knife, Henry took him down too. And finally, reinforcements arrived, and the last enemy soldier fled. As the sun rose, the scale of what happened became clear. In just a few minutes of fighting, 2 Americans defeated an entire raiding party, and Henry Johnson saved his fellow soldier from being taken prisoner. Henry became one of our most famous soldiers of the war. His picture was printed on recruitment posters and ads for victory war stamps. Former President Teddy Roosevelt wrote that he was one of the bravest men in the war. In 1919, Henry rode triumphantly in a victory parade. The crowds lined Fifth Avenue for miles cheering this American soldier. Henry was one of the first Americans to receive France's highest award for valor. But his own nation didn't award him anything, not even the Purple Heart, though he had been wounded 21 times. Nothing for his bravery, though he had saved a fellow soldier at great risk to himself. His injuries left him crippled. He couldn't find work. His marriage fell apart, and in his early 30s, he passed away. Now, America can't change what happened to Henry Johnson. We can't change what happened to too many soldiers like him who went uncelebrated because our nation judged them by the color of their skin and not the content of their character. But we can do our best to make it right. In 1996, President Clinton awarded Henry Johnson a Purple Heart. And today, 97 years after his extraordinary acts of courage and selflessness, I'm proud to award him the Medal of Honor. We are honored to be joined today by some very special guests, veterans of Henry's regiment, the 369th. Thank you to each of you for your service. And I would ask Command Sergeant Major Lewis Wilson of the New York National Guard to come forward and accept this medal on Private Johnson's behalf.
The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, March 3, 1863, has awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to Private Henry Johnson, United States Army. Private Henry Johnson distinguished himself by extraordinary acts of heroism at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as a member of Company C, 369th Infantry Regiment, 93rd Infantry Division, American Expeditionary Forces on May 15, 1918, during combat operations against the enemy on the front lines of the Western Front in France. In the early morning hours, Private Johnson and another soldier were on sentry duty at a forward outpost when they received a surprise attack from a German raiding party consisting of at least 12 soldiers. While under intense enemy fire and despite receiving significant wounds, Private Johnson mounted a brave retaliation, resulting in several enemy casualties. When his fellow soldier was badly wounded and being carried away by the enemy, Private Johnson exposed himself to grave danger by advancing from his position to engage the 2 enemy captors in hand-to-hand combat. Wielding only a knife and gravely wounded himself, Private Johnson continued fighting, defeating the 2 captors and rescuing the wounded soldier. Displaying great courage, he continued to hold back the larger enemy force until the defeated enemy retreated, leaving behind a large cache of weapons and equipment and providing valuable intelligence. Without Private Johnson's quick actions and continued fighting, even in the face of almost certain death, the enemy might have succeeded in capturing prisoners and the outpost without abandoning valuable intelligence. Private Johnson's extraordinary heroism and selflessness above and beyond the call of duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, Company C, 369th Infantry Regiment, 93rd Infantry Division, and the United States Army.